All right, we'll be beginning our presentation. I'd like to present Peggy Ushman. She is a senior program analyst on the Information Security Oversight Office staff. Peggy has served our country for over 20 years. She in both the military and civil service. She joined ISOO in 2009. And I would have to say that, based on all of my experience, that in terms of derivative classification and in terms of markings, which this is not a presentation on markings, and she'll make that clear, I think she is one of the foremost experts in the executive branch on these subjects. If you have questions dealing with these areas, this is your opportunity to ask them. It is a good opportunity to receive an overview in a program from someone that has great expertise in the field. So without further ado, I'd like to have Peggy please come on up and please let's have your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, welcome to derivative classification. As Pat said, this is not a class on markings. However, I would like you to know that I am open to any and all questions during the presentation. So if you do have any questions, please go ahead and ask them because you might not remember them after we move on to another topic. So this is going to be more of a programmatic review of what agencies should include in their derivative classification program, which will be primarily focused on the training requirements. Before you can truly understand derivative classification, you really need to understand how original classification works. So that is a big part of the training. We give the references from the executive order and the implementing directive on both original and derivative classification, because if you don't know what it means when you're looking at originally classified document, if you can't decode those markings, then you more than likely will not be able to properly mark a derivatively classified document. Where'd I go? There we go. Wrong button. Okay, derivative classification. You probably all are familiar with this definition. It means the incorporating, paraphrasing, restating, or generating in new form information that has already been classified and then marking the newly developed material consistent with the classification markings that apply to that source information. It includes classification of information based on classification guidance as well as other documents. Derivative classifiers do not need to possess original classification authority. Pretty much anybody who has a security clearance can derivatively classify. Derivative classification is not merely the duplication or reproduction of existing classified information. For those who have to deal with the SF311 data, and we ask you for the number of derivatively classified decisions that have been made in your agency, we do not expect the number of copies you made of one document to be included in that count. Okay. Persons who apply derivative classification marking shall receive training at least once every 2 years. This is a new requirement in Executive Order 13526. The implementing directive, 32 CFR 2001, section 71D, outlines the minimum elements of information that should be included in this training. The first one is the proper application of the derivative classification principles that are outlined in EO 13526. All of the points that we are going to be going through are actually derivative classification principles. There is a new emphasis on avoiding overclassification, so you need to include this in your training programs. The Reducing Overclassification Act is the one that requires the agency inspector generals to come in and review your programs, and I know that this has been a difficult process for many, but overclassification is a big problem, so it does need to be addressed. Classification levels. There are only 3 levels of classification. Unclassified is not actually a classification level. Neither are these. These are dissemination and control markings. They are not classification levels. CUI is not a classification level, regardless of how important they think they are. Okay. You also need to discuss and be aware of the duration of classification. Let me find my notes because I have it all written out what the executive order says. Okay. EO 13526, section 1.5 addresses original classification, which states that an OCA can only classify information originally up to 25 years. After that, there are procedures in place to continue the classification beyond that, but the OCA can only originally classify up to that point. Section 2.1 talks about derivative classification. It says that persons who apply derivative classification markings shall carry forward the date or event for declassification that corresponds to the longest period of classification among the sources. So if you have 5 sources, whichever one remains classified the longest, that is the classification or declassification instruction that gets carried over to your new marking. Original classification, 32 CFR 2001.12 states the exact same thing as the executive order does, that the OCA shall establish a specific date or event for declassification up to 25 years. I was going to add something in there, and I'm getting old, and my mind just totally lost it. So hopefully it will come back to me, and I can talk about it. Derivative classification. You carry the instructions from your source document, whether it be another document or a classification guide. If the source document is missing declassification instructions, which will happen on older documents, then you simply calculate a date of 25 years from the date of the source document, if it's dated, or if it's not dated, 25 years from the date you create your new document. And all of this is laid out in the executive order and the 32 CFR. Identification and markings is covered in section 1.6 for original classification and section 2.1 for derivative classification in the executive order. And it's also in subpart C of 32 CFR part 2001. It lays out all the requirements for markings, your portion marking, your overall classification markings, your classification authority block. In addition to this, we have created, actually it was a few years ago when I think Mr. Sierra first started it, a marking book that gives examples and pretty pictures on all of these marking requirements. And it has been regularly updated since then. It is available on the ISOO webpage. Classification prohibitions and limitations. I'm sure everyone is aware of these. They're mentioned at just about every markings briefing or refresher security training, but they're very important, and you need to keep mentioning them in all of your training. As we all know, oh, by the way, the executive order and the ISOO directive say exactly the same thing on this topic. There are no changes. But basically, information shall not be classified, continue to be maintained as classified, or fail to be classified in order to conceal violations of law, inefficiency, or administrative error, to prevent embarrassment to a person, organization, or agency, to restrain competition, or to prevent or delay the release of information that does not require protection in the interest of national security. Basic scientific research information that is not clearly related to national security shall not be classified. I know that that is an issue for some of the agencies that work with scientists and a lot of academic researchers and people like that. So something to be aware of. There is also a section that talks about reclassification, and it states very clearly that information may not be reclassified after declassification and release to the public under proper authority unless the reclassification is personally approved in writing by the agency head based on a document-by-document determination by the agency that the reclassification is required to prevent significant and demonstrable damage to national security. Sometimes it's easier to just leave it alone and not bring it to the public's attention. The information, another requirement is that the information may be reasonably recovered without bringing undue attention to it. Sometimes, if you say something about it, the media will pick it up and run with it and blow it completely out of proportion. So that's what you want to avoid in some of these instances. But if you really feel that something should be reclassified, then by all means, press forward. Sanctions. There are sanctions in Executive Order 13526, Section 5.5. Officers and government employees and its contractors, licensees, certificate holders, and grantees shall be subject to appropriate sanctions if they knowingly, willfully, or negligently disclose to unauthorized persons information properly classified under the order or predecessor orders. Classify or continue the classification of information in violation of this order or implementing directive. Create or continue a special access program contrary to the requirements of the order, or if it contravenes any other provision of this order or its implementing directives. Sanctions may include reprimand, suspension without pay, removal, termination of classification authority, loss or denial of access to classified information, or any other sanctions in accordance with applicable law and agency regulation. I'm a personal fan of termination, firing squad, whatever, but that's my own personal belief. There are many people out there who I just don't know what they were doing. I don't know what they were thinking. Let's see. The agency head, senior agency official, or other supervisory official shall, at a minimum, promptly remove the classification authority of any individual who demonstrates reckless disregard or pattern of error in applying the classification standards of this order. The agency head or the senior agency official shall take appropriate and prompt corrective action when a violation or infraction occurs and notify the director of ISOO when a violation does occur. And the implementing directive does lay out the instances in which you would want to report a violation to ISOO. Classification challenges. This is kind of a tough one because each agency handles it differently. Some have a very robust classification challenge program. Some don't deal with that much classified information, so they really don't have any policy in place. It varies from agency to agency, but it is up to your agency to develop a classification challenge process. And the agency head or the senior agency official is responsible for establishing that agency process. The procedure shall ensure that individuals are not subject to retribution for bringing such actions. An opportunity is provided for a review by an impartial official or panel, and individuals are advised of their rights to appeal agency decisions to the ISCAP. As a side note, documents that are required to be submitted for pre-publication review or other administrative process pursuant to an approved non-disclosure agreement are not covered by this section. They are specifically covered by the non-disclosure agreement. If you actually read it, it does talk about that in great detail. Agencies shall establish a system for processing, tracking, and recording formal classification challenges. So this is an important part of your classification program. You should have this in place. And when ISOO comes out and does the much enjoyed on-site reviews, they do actually look at that and ask if you've got a program in place. Security classification guides are always fun. They're not the easiest thing to write, but they are necessary. This is basically a record of the original classification decisions that have been made in your agency. They outline the elements of information that need to be classified. In some cases, they also identify the information that is unclassified. The guide should tell you how long you keep it classified and at what level you keep it classified. So they should be specific, they should be focused, and they should be updated regularly. Having said that, EO 13526 also mandated that agencies do a fundamental classification guidance review every 2 years. Basically review all of your classification guides, see what needs to be updated, see what needs to be written, see what can be canceled. The first one was done in 2012. The next one is due in June of 2017. We will start sending out information about this in early 2016. So if you are involved in that process at all, start getting ready for it. It'll be fun. Did I say 5? I'm sorry. It's required every 5 years. The first one was required within 2 years of the executive order. So every 5 years we get to run through this. Information sharing. This is something else that needs to be covered in your training programs because we have been leaning towards more information sharing in the last few years. When you're classifying a document, this is something that needs to be considered. Who do you need to share this information with? So when you mark a document, you have to make sure that the dissemination markings show that information. If it's not on there, you won't be able to share it. And nobody else will be able to get that information. So a positive release has to be considered for all of your classified information. And by a positive release, I mean things like REL2. It is releasable to these countries, these organizations. So just keep that under consideration when you're classifying documents. Information sharing is becoming a huge thing. Okay, any questions? I am open to questions about the program, about marking requirements, anything you would like to ask. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Peggy. I'm Robin Richard from NTA, and I'm not in the classification management office, but I'm in the analysis directorate, and I help analysts determine classification and sourcing. And so I work with Betsy Smith and
Yes.
her team.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was also on the foreign disclosure team for a long time. And so this is a question that comes up constantly that nobody seems to know the answer to. Is regarding a lack of releasability in your guide. When you're looking for a releasability, who do you go to? Do you go to classification management, or do you go to the foreign disclosure team? Or do you go to the OCA?
Probably a combination of all. The OCA should be making that determination, and it should be in the classification guides once that determination is made. Foreign Disclosure Office is a great place to go if you need to share this information with other countries or governments. If you have intel information, if you're from an intelligence agency, they have a separate Foreign Disclosure Office dealing just with the intel information that you do need to go talk to. So basically a combination, but the OCA should be making that determination originally. Anything else? I can take it.
Anything goes to us.
Anything goes. But I know what y'all really want. You want to either go down to the gift store and get your 10% discount, or you want to go see what CUI is talking about. Am I right? Yes, okay. If you have no other questions, then thank you so much for listening to my briefing, and I'm always available for questions. You can email me, go to our webpage, send questions. Um, just contact me any way you want. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted to make one note. If you go to the ISOO page that is on www.archives.gov, all of our phone numbers and email addresses are publicly listed. So you can actually contact us through that. It's not necessary to get a business card from us, but you can. We all have our business cards with us. But you can actually look us right up on our website, and we can address your questions directly. Thank you very much again for your attention, and please take advantage of any session that you'd like to.